All right, beloved, welcome to my diary. There is a lot to talk about, so I'm going to just hop right into it. My thoughts about Trump and the impeachment and the arguments against it and all the stuff leading up to it, etc. So, my first thought was that he kind of almost did it. I mean, at the time, I thought he had done it. It was the end of December of 2020, and I was thinking, like, yeah, I mean, he was bad in my opinion, but they're going to be able to rehab his image in a couple decades to a generation. They're going to have revamped and re-spoken about how he is, and he's going to get the honors that all of these presidents do, no matter what bad things they seem to have done, even as the years pass on. But then January 6th happened, and I was like, wow, like, he definitely made me eat my words that I never said out loud. But at any rate, I've just noticed that there, like I said in my last video, there's been this whole effort to act like it's in the past or just move on or, all of these thoughts. And I disagree with that. I disagree with not only the obvious of not just moving on and letting everything go, but I disagree with this idea of pointing to this one event, this one rally, January 6th, and pointing to his word peace and being like, this one event it can't be enough, blah, blah, blah. And, I've watched many videos on it from like lawyers' perspectives and other people's perspectives. And honestly, I think looking at his past is the most wise option because it's so clear that other events similar to this have happened in the past. For example, the insurrection coup attempt / kidnapping assassination attempt in Michigan this past summer, which was also spurned on by Trump egging people on to free themselves, liberate themselves, find ways to get out of a tyrannical government asking them to wear a mask during a pandemic. That was real. That happened. That happened a few months ago too. Not even a year ago. 2 in 1 year, right? Coup attempts by the same party in different parts of the world. And it does, not the world, the nation. And it does feel like one was kind of a, tester, a teaser, a sampler platter for what was to come in the actual U.S. Capitol later. So I want to also note that wasn't even the first kind of violence that we saw from the Trump campaign, right? Because we had all these weird instances of like, get him out of here and like, him egging people on to like get roughed up. People have been roughed up, but him egging on the cops also to rough up people when they were taking them in. He just kind of likes it. He likes that kind of violence. He liked the people being, tear gassed so that he could hold up a Bible upside down and backwards and what have you and just wave it around. He likes violence. He likes to use excessive violence, and he preached for excessive violence for what people wanted to happen. If you want to shut up the Black Lives Matter protesters, you sick them with National Guard and shove them into unmarked vans. And if you want to have the election be what you want it to be, you run up and break windows and put up a working gallows and start looking for the second and third in command of the country. Okay? So we have this obvious violence that he has been encouraging. And I think we could even go back further than that, because he does have a propensity for violence back in his civilian life, right? When he would take out a full page ad to condemn the Central Park Five and ask for them to be harmed, even without actual direct evidence and all of this stuff. He helped facilitate and whip the city into a frenzy over the Central Park Five, and to this day says he doesn't believe, despite all evidence to the contrary, that these 5 children at the time were innocent. And he continues, he has just all these weird little instances throughout his life, and especially once he got more popular in campaigns. And of course, there's the whole propensity of violence towards women and misogyny, and his many cases that women have going against him, cases of defamation for calling them liars. The list just kind of goes on, and that doesn't even get into the Teen USA girls, but we've got to move on. So I did mention other coup, though, I think is one of the more important pieces, because when you think of the Michigan coup in context with him just tweeting out people, instructions such as, going and making their voices heard, cheering them on when they had the guns, cheering them on when they were doing all these things. I think that directly led to the FBI having to stop these people they were like looking to see where she would drive or how the cops arrive at certain, instances, like if there's a situation, which roads the cops are more commonly to take so that they could avoid those routes, so that they could kidnap her more successfully. Like, these people were very serious, and they were very serious about, this is the same as showing up with cuffs and a gallows, showing up to kidnap, take hostage a leader of government, to take over their buildings and do executions as deemed necessary to take over this state or the country. So I feel like, if there had just been this one, maybe it could have been argued a little better. But the fact that there's two, and nobody seemed to take the other one as seriously as they should have. It just kind of was in the news for about 2 weeks, and then it was kind of let go. But it seems directly correlated, especially because he was also the one encouraging them on Twitter. And then this time as well, he was the one telling people show up because something big is going to happen. His kids were saying it. His supporters were saying it. He had meetings, but we'll continue on. So he went on to lie about the election fraud, which I do think is a very huge deal. This whole just saying a bunch of stuff, right? Just saying that he was being the machines were switching, and that, oh look, this person came in with a briefcase. Like, I remember one of those videos I clicked on, and that was supposed to be suspicious. It was literally people in regular business attire with regular, not suitcases, like what are they called? You know what I'm talking about. Briefcases. That's the word. Briefcases. Like, not something that you would think would be able to hold hundreds of ballots, or people would be nitpicking at how the ballots were stored before and after they were, like, it's too much, especially when you know that each state does its own voting. The logistics of red and blue states coming together to do this crazy under-schemed thing that would get so many people in trouble. They're willing to believe that happened, but they're not willing to believe, like, a lot of the other stuff that is occurring right in front of their faces, with people trying to actually undermine an election by saying somebody else undermined the election. Okay, so that was the issue, though, is that that wasn't the biggest lies he was telling. The issue wasn't just that he, had it stolen from him. It was that because it was stolen from him, and because who was coming into power, Biden was coming into power, it was like your kids were going to be taken, your babies are going to be taken. I need to write some of them down because they were just ludicrous. He was saying, like, he would take down the Washington Monument. Like, why? Biden loves all of that mumbo jumbo. He loves the symbolism and getting to, do the thing at this time in this place, and the whole ritual of it, because he's a part of all that grift. So this idea that he would be the guy who would take down the Washington Monument, it's just absurd. But people were believing he was going to take down the Washington Monument. He was telling people that he was going to round up MAGA and start slaughtering people, and people believe this. This is real stuff that people were actively believing. This is part of why people were sobbing, apparently, when they were watching Biden get inaugurated, because they were like, it's the end. I need to hide my kid, hide your wife, hide your kid, because Biden's coming. And it was because that was a lie that Trump was saying. He wasn't just saying they stole the election or there was fraud in only the states that I lost somehow. There wasn't fraud like that last year. There was fraud. He should have won by even more, in his opinion. But it just makes no sense. If there was fraud last time, he would have done something for that fraud. then the fraud didn't work in his favor this time, so now the fraud's the worst thing. It's just too much. It's just too much. So now we do have this situation because, though, of the specific lying about the machinery from Dominion and Smartmatic, I believe. Let me see. I think that's what I wrote down, yeah. So they're suing because of all these lies, and the saddest part for that to me is that it didn't, like, if officials from these states were like showing evidence like there was no fraud, that meant nothing. It literally took an actual corporation suing another corporation to start to, for defamation, for anything to start to seem like maybe somebody would have consequences, maybe somebody would end up in court, maybe somebody would end up having to pay hefty fees, etc. And so then henceforth, that's what we have, kind of with this Fox News situation, with them kind of hoping, I guess, that because Lou Dobbs was one of the bigger names with a lot of viewership, that they could just kind of axe him. They were already planning on axing him anyway. Might as well just axe him a little bit early, let him have his money and go. He's the oldest one of all the liars on their show, so they still have plenty of years of use out of Tucker Carlson and Jeanine Pirro and these other people they have on the show. So, they are going to try to, get rid of some people and see how it works. And I see that they've already started to ask Smartmatic to let go of the lawsuit now that they've stopped having Lou Dobbs, or they canceled him. Personally, I hope that they take it all the way. These people, Lindsey Powell, all of them, Rudy Giuliani, I hope that they all get really just drugged through the mud and a lot of time wasted with these lawsuits. That's what I'm really hoping with them. That's my hope. And speaking of the lawsuits and Rudy and Powell, Sidney Powell, I think that part also should be part of this whole trial. The fact that they did try to go through the legal way, and then they didn't bring any evidence. They refused to say certain things aloud in court that they were constantly saying on the TV, which led to these defamation suits. But they were waving around affidavits. The affidavits were written by, if the few people who spoke were any indication, just a bunch of nut jobs who, again, were doing things like, I don't like that they stored the ballots on the countertop type of arguments, or the arguments where it's see, this person walked out of the room, so there were no witnesses, and then it's you point to the other corner and you're do you see that gentleman right there? That's the Republican witness, that guy right there that's still standing in the room that entire time, didn't move. So it's just it's just more of this just nonsense, and they basically got a bunch of the shit thrown out, and then now they're trying to argue that it got thrown out because they didn't want to hear no, dude, it means that the court is not going to waste the time and money and energy, the finances, to haul everybody's ass to court for something that literally doesn't even have a basic foundational standing, not even a tiny iota or a bit. So it's just I can't with all that, and I think that should also absolutely, since there is evidence, there are people who say that they heard him talking about proclaiming victory. I declare victory, before any of this even started, and he's been doing it ever since, proclaiming victory even the night of, even as it started to seem like he was about to start making that backslide. The early red wave of people being counted was going to have its obvious and predicted backslide. It's ludicrous. So let's move on from Rudy, though, because there is another important thing that I think should be brought up in this whole impeachment trial, which is the December 18th meeting with Sidney Powell, Michael Flynn, a bunch of others, and there was apparently shouting matches. Axios, I believe, was the ones who wrote this, and I believe it was the same man who had that interview with Trump where Trump was we're number one in the world, we're number one country, and he's among which countries? And the guy whose face was very confused that whole time because it wasn't an American, lobbing easy questions at him. But at any rate, they had another article where they were talking about this meeting a little bit before the whole thing went down, where people were arguing, trying to see what else they could do. Michael Flynn was mentioning martial law. After that, Trump was considering putting him in charge of the FBI. He was considering putting him in charge of some other types of things to be able to do it. They were still trying to see, what they could do to make a whole big deal. They were still honing in on, January 6th and January 20th and making big fusses and scenes, and Pence not signing things. Like, all that was happening in the weeks prior. So to pretend that those meetings, also these secret meetings, weren't happening consistently throughout December, leading straight up to an event that had a lot of sketchy things go down in it. A lot of cogs suddenly weren't turning the way they were supposed to. Wheels were getting caught up. Who knows how the analogy should go. But the point is that a lot of things failed that were supposed to be in place. And it wasn't just one, it wasn't just two, it was way too many to feel comfortable. Capitol Police barely did their job. Their main objective, supposedly, someone has said to me, was that they're supposed to protect the people inside of the house and not necessarily the house itself, which is even sadder because Pence was almost caught right within a minute. There was like a minute's time where they could have caught him, but he managed to get away within the minute with his family. AOC was given confusing instructions and yelled at by an angry Capitol Police, and like I said, sent her to who knows where. She was sent somewhere where she was like, where am I supposed to go? No one's here. This was very confusing, after this guy yelled at me and just sent me to this random spot. And of course, there was the missing panic buttons in Iana's office. There was, which no one said was supposed to happen, and she has used those before, and they're supposed to be there, but every single one was ripped out and removed. Who has said anything about that? There's the fact that the Capitol Police didn't have enough people there, and way less than they've had at previous events. Usually the Capitol Police protocol is to straight up execute people who, even if you are accidentally wandering up the steps, you've taken a wrong turn, you're driving in front of the Capitol on accident, people have been executed for that. Literally shot with babies in the car, literally killed on the steps of the Capitol for looking suspicious or acting suspicious. So that protocol was totally thrown out the window. Instead of having people sniping them from afar and taking them out, there was just very few police, and they were easily shoved around, and the barricades were kind of nothing, especially compared with how many people were shown up, which they knew, which supposedly they had all these reports, but they didn't act on it. They didn't have enough people there. Then you have the ones who were letting people in. Then you have the ones who were taking selfies with people. Then you have the ones where it was like they're calling in for backup and they're being denied backup. Backup is just up the street, literally armed and sitting and ready to go, but nobody who has the authority is authorizing the backup to be brought in any way. So we have this it's just crazy, right? We have all these situations that are occurring at once that absolutely need to be investigated and show fully that this happened. Not because it was an accident, not because it was this protest turned riot, because like I said, this was a 2-day event. It built up slowly from the very angry day of the 5th, with people yelling and screaming and talking of mayhem, just going on about race wars, about having to fight, having to overturn things, Mike Pence being a traitor, everybody being a traitor. And then we have the fact that on the actual day of the insurrection, people knew to bring their pipe bombs, their workable gallows, their cuffs, their pepper spray, their batons that were collapsible. The fact that because the pipe bombs themselves, right, that part where they're planted at the RNC and DNC to be distractions, that part alone really does show that there was some sort of pre-planning, that they did want this to happen and be a chaotic event that would distract an opposing armed force. And so do I think that a lot of people were on Facebook and naively thought that they were going to a serious civil rights riots type of thing, yeah, I think like thousands of them probably were totally misjudged and really thought that they were some sort of equivalent to Black Lives Matter, and that what they were doing had any sort of equivalent to equality and justice for the people. I do think there were those people. I do think some of those people did wander along with the others. But there's way too much evidence that there's a lot of people who did show up with weaponry because they were prepared to be violent long before. They were prepared to turn it into a riot long before. Even if they have no idea about the coup attempt, even if they have no idea about everything, they were more than willing to do the violence. And everybody who has claimed innocence has been totally willing to do the violence. Has been, what you can see them on their videos yelling and yelling, oh, like, let's go in, we did it, we've got to fight, where we don't take this stuff, blah blah blah. They're willingly smashing down windows, climbing through broken windows, which is obvious violence. They're very willingly running through the house, taking things, robbing the place, right? Looters are when another group unaffiliated with you is, you know, taking things and taking advantage of the distraction your mob or your protest or riot is creating to do their thing. This was the mob itself actually taking artifacts from their own country, robbing their own country's ancient or historical artifacts that are up in there, artistic works by fellow Americans, smearing feces, urine, taking pictures of things they shouldn't be, like files and stuff, taking files, taking laptops, taking, who knows who snuck in there with them and managed to take something too. That's a whole nother reason why Trump should be held accountable, is that we don't know if any other country's people, or if traitors to the U.S., because that did happen with one of them. She was trying to sell a laptop of Pelosi's to the Russian government, but we don't know if like that type of thing was pre-planned, if she was supposed to go in there initially anyways for the Russian government. We just don't know, because the whole thing was fucking chaos. And people don't bring gallows to a riot. You don't. You don't. You don't bring it to a protest that might turn into a riot. You bring it when you have plans to assassinate somebody, which people were running through the halls looking for the second and third in command of the entire country. They were looking for Pence. They were looking for Pelosi. And they likely would have taken whatever assassination they could. They likely would have taken the killing of pretty much any member of the squad or anybody who was squad adjacent, which I did think it was really an important moment when there was that one Democrat who was like, I was going to say we should all go to the Republican side and maybe they would mistake us for Republicans. And then I realized that the squad can't do that. And I was like, oh, wow, sir, you got it. But sometimes it really does take a moment like that for someone to realize what privilege really means. That in a mob you realize you would be safe and able to blend in with the enemy or whatever because of who you are. And so that alone adds a whole layer of stress to what the squad was experiencing, them having to go through that fear, especially since they've already likely had experiences with the cops that aren't that pleasant. Live all around them, they can see some cops are with them, some cops don't really seem to be with them or seem to really care or be taking this as seriously. Like, everything is going way slower than it should be. Those people should have been evacuated long before the people had been able to breach so close to, or were even so close to the stairs. When they had breached the first barrier way back and at the beginning of the lawn, that alone should have had people being evacuated. Once a whole horde was rushing hundreds of yards closer, I think that's when they should have started evacuating. So I don't blame anybody for being scared. I don't blame anybody for being worried. This whole thing was super sketch. And I do want to go back to the fact that there were two barriers. There was the one right by the stairs, and then there was the one that was by the beginning of the lawn, because that one was breached while Trump was still talking. There were Proud Boys who were around that barrier, and what's interesting is you do see a lot of them have earpieces and they'll go and consult with each other before going to a different part and suddenly starting to like go against the buildings and trying to push things down and trying to get inside. So that also seems like pretty obvious that this was a coordinated event where the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, all these places, all these militias are named, and none of them are in any way Antifa or left-wing adjacent. It's all just like the Boogaloo Boys. It's all these groups that are on the far right, who are right there front and center, and they were the ones causing a lot of this mayhem. They were the ones who would I just can't even get it out of my head, the image of one of those Proud Boys walking up to another one, like one of the leaders, and being like, asking him something, put his arm around him, asks him something, and the other guy says like yes, and then he walks straight over and just starts going crazy against the thing. Like, how much more obvious and blatant did that even have to be, as something you're just witnessing with your own eyes, of them escalating the violence, and especially as more and more people join them, and they've already started the violence while Trump is still talking. Meanwhile, Trump is still talking. He says the word fight like 20 plus times while speaking, the word peace once. Every one of his other people who are speaking are saying things like trial by combat, fight for everything, 1776. We've got people tweeting that. We've got people, Josh Hawley raising a fist, Marjorie Taylor Greene acting the flippin' fool, Bobart also tweeting where fucking Pelosi was. Like, just bizarre, sick behavior, all of it. And of course, there's also the whole meeting that somebody had also on the 5th, where somebody was given a tour all around the whole place to show where different buildings were. I'm pretty sure that was Boebert as well. She claims it was just her family. Your family wasn't supposed to be in there, though. That was against the rules, and it's been against the rules for almost a year now due to COVID. So I'm not sure how she's still getting away with that, how that's not been there. There's gotta be cameras, but they haven't given us a definitive answer this way or that. So finally, I do want to say that, speaking on the whole thing about him saying like fight, 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 like so many times, all these people egging them on so many times, and then now in retrospect they're like, well, I meant it symbolically, I meant it like this, it wasn't like that, I was just using, like, it just doesn't make sense. The trial by combat thing, especially Rudy's thing, like, oh, I was just making a Game of Thrones reference to this scene where literally people have trial by combat and somebody dies. So it's like, dude, you weren't even, what are you even trying to say? But it just reminds me of, like, it's when somebody says something, or when something happens but somebody says something else is happening, like, the no offense thing. It's just like, dude, you still offended people. You can say it wasn't like a riot, but it was still a riot. Or you can say it wasn't a coup, it was a riot, but no, it was still a coup. They were specifically there not just to make a noise or make people scared, but they were specifically actively looking for people and looking to overturn the election and overturn what was happening and halt the democratic process. So it's just like, just because you're saying no quid pro quo, just because you're saying, I said do it peacefully, I said fight peacefully, just because you say it doesn't mean that that's like what was actually happening. When you're using words like steal and revolution and 1776 and combat and all of these other weird ways that all these people were talking and saying we need martial law. Like, there's a reason why people were thinking that the lights were going to turn off for 10 days, and the electricity was going to turn off, and then after that we were all going to have the lights turn on, and everybody, like all the Clintons and Obamas and the Bidens, were going to be executed, and Trump was going to still be the president. The reason people had such a violent fantasy about this was because this was always like about violence. Like, there was never a moment of any of this QAnon, MAGA, or far right adjacent stuff that had white supremacist stuff. I mean, white supremacist is inherently violent, rhetoric. But the fact that this was all going like this was because violence has been the MO this entire time. It would only escalate from there to everybody being just blanket executed after 10 days of no electricity. Just terrifying imagery. Just doesn't make sense to me. So, let me see. What else did I need to say? Okay, so then we have to get on to the fact that Trump let it go on for hours and hours and hours, and he didn't say anything, and he, in fact, seemed to enjoy it. He seemed to, by all accounts, be really feeling it. He wouldn't let the National Guard be called in. Why would you do that if you were against what they were doing? It wasn't until it became clear that, it wasn't really going to go his way as much, and he had enough people demanding this. And of course his phone was blowing up this entire time, but apparently Trump does not answer the phone when he's live because he doesn't want to miss a thing. So he refused to take calls from people who were scared for their lives. It wasn't just AOC at the time. There were a lot of Republicans who were barricading themselves in, who were scared for their lives, who were calling in, begging for help and assistance from the National Guard. And so, yeah, he just didn't care at the time. And when he finally did step out, hours later, he steps out. He's like, I love you guys. You're all very special, but you do need to go home. Like, I guess we fucked up, you guys. I guess we didn't do it. Whatever. Just go home. It's no big deal. And so by then, of course, the National Guard had been allowed to be deployed and extra troops had been allowed to be deployed because other states were, coming in to help. Pence had been able to step in and authorize somebody to come in and help. And so, it just goes to show, like, all of a sudden, like compare that behavior of Trump's lack of eagerness to send in the National Guard for violence and mayhem when the looting starts, the shooting starts, that type of feeling. But the robbing starts, nothing happens. We just let them rob. We take selfies with them, I guess. But compare that to when he had a bunch of people singing outside near the White House, and then he sends a bunch of people to gas them and get them out of the way just so he could have that photo op. Like, he loved sending out the National Guard not like 3 months ago. He was sending out people to be taken in unmarked vans just a few months ago, and he was like, I love it. In fact, I'm going to write a law about vandalism that gets you 10 years because that's how I really feel about it. That was how he felt, but now he doesn't feel about that in any way. He has none of that unmarked van energy. Okay? And the part that I think is also really telling is that Republicans overall aren't even really arguing that he's not guilty. Some of them are saying, like, this wasn't an insurrection, it wasn't a coup, it wasn't that big of a deal. These same people wanted to turn a couple of buildings, a couple of businesses being looted on a street. They wanted to conflate that to the whole city burned down. That was like last year. They were willing to like make this into a huge thing. They went on and on about the $3 billion nationwide of damages that because of the courthouse. I think there was a courthouse and like a police precinct that were burned. Most of it was statues, and there were businesses that were looted. Mostly not by the actual Black Lives Matter protesters themselves, but by people taking advantage of the mobs and the police going off to fight the mobs. So they basically, though, they're trying to argue that not only is this not even really that big of a deal, but that we just it's a technicality that we can't get him because it was because he's out of office now, or because it was like the end. It's just the best loophole, if you committed in the last few weeks in the office, what can anybody do because you went home to whatever state you were from before all of this? That's just absolutely ludicrous, and there's no way to move on and heal if we continue to not have consequences for our presidents. And I say that knowing and saying that all of our presidents have been like war criminals. They for just many of them over the years, they break the laws, they lied, they lied to get to break more laws. It's gross to watch, and continuously there seems to be no standard. And there's not just no standard for the president, there seems to be no standard for while you're in Congress, while you're in other forms of government. It's just really rare that anybody's taken to task, and when they are taken to task, it's something like the ex-governor of Michigan getting $1,000 fine for poisoning the people of Flint, Michigan's water. And it's like, wow, dude, my husband's had like a more hefty ticket for a parking ticket, but this guy who is in charge of people's lives gets basically no punishment. So it's just absurd that we've gotten to this point where they're like, oh, cancel culture. And it's like, no, you were rightly fired because you're bad at your job and you failed so many people. You were rightly given consequences. You were rightly being carted off to prison because you've hurt people and you've broken the law and you've done something that you weren't supposed to do. That's not cancel culture. That's just basic consequences. Anything you do has consequences. It's just, you know, sometimes if you do a good thing, the consequences are more positive typically. And if you do bad things, the consequences are bad typically. This idea that everyone's just canceled, like, no, the only people who have ever been permanently canceled so far, it's really been like Epstein, Weinstein, right? Wasn't that the director, the creepy director guy? Then there was Cosby, people who have actually physically harmed usually multiple people, and even them, they still have their, you know, fans, like R. Kelly. Even if people who had homes around the schools in Chicago that he used to park outside of, those little middle schools and high schools, even if those people have testimony, there's still people out there who will call them innocent. So cancel culture really, like, people have the right to not want to work with you. People have the right to not want to buy your crap. People have the right to fire you for doing a crappy job at your job. And people have the total right to impeach somebody who does all of the things that I've just laid out behind us. Now, my whole thing is actually, my main concern is that I want Trump to not be able to run for president again. And there are ways to do that that don't require too many votes. Like, there's ways you can do that that have majority rule. I forget which amendments they are. I want to say like the 14th or 15th. I can't remember. But I do remember somebody talking about that recently. And honestly, I think that's the best way to go. Just use that majority in Senate so that you can just effectively cock block him from the 2024 election, nip that shit in the bud, let him do those other things from behind the scenes, but that guy just cannot be in the actual place of power with that actual power in his hand ever again. That is my full belief. So whether we can actually convince a bunch of Republicans to do the right thing and not fail their country and fail their people and just constantly think, I don't know, what are they thinking? I guess they want a longer, the grift is good. They want to have a longer career. They like getting that steady amount of money every year from that nice position. I don't know if they really are scared that people are going to try to kill them. I don't know if they really do believe the stupidity. I don't know if they're really that dumb. I just don't know, and I really don't care. I just think that he does need a consequence, and at the bare minimum, that consequence needs to be that he cannot be in the office anymore. But I would really like to see him get a lot of these rights revoked, take away the rights so that he can't see what's going to happen. Any of the briefings, any of the intelligence briefings, he should get to see none of it. He should get to not have social or Secret Service. That's what it is. I don't want him to have the Secret Service. I don't want him to have the benefits, the money benefits. I don't think his family should get to have the benefits either, because that's just the biggest grift ever. He managed to get a lot of money out of that, didn't he? And that was one of the reasons I was thinking, like, wow, he did it. He really did it. But I do think that would be great if those things could be taken away too. But at the very end, the very base bottom of it, I think he just shouldn't be able to be the president anymore. And that should just be taken away, finished, final. The basic, easy punishment. It doesn't have to go much further than that. One could just easily make that said, made it done, draw a clean line, because if they don't, it's just going to make it so that anybody who's has lacking of morals can decide they want to have a fucking coup attempt and be like, oh, well, I tried. All right. Guess it's back to go to my country now because I went ahead and I gave it my best shot, but I guess I wasn't successful at that coup. So at any rate, we're almost done here. I also wanted to mention the fact that Mitch choosing to go along with this whole thing, like everybody, or Republicans choosing to go along with this whole thing about him technically being out of office, is just so absurd, also on the basis of the fact that at any point the Senate could have been brought back before the 20th to start the trial while he was still in office, and they deliberately chose not to. None of them were arguing with the leader Mitch about any of that then. They literally waited until he was the minority leader, and then they were like, oh, well, see, now it's too late. And that's just like, you waited that week and a half. You sat on it for a week and a half so that you wouldn't have to do it. And then now we're saying it's too late. It's just like the games that are being played over something this serious. It's just gross to me. It's immoral. It's infuriating. I don't get it. But at any rate, I think these are all of my thoughts so far. And I think I'm ready to go tackle whatever's been happening this whole time. All right. May your ancestors and spirit guides be with you at every crossroads. And I will see you next time. And I'm going to get out of my kids' room now.